My name is Alexandra Kemp and I'm County Councillor for the division of Clench Wharton, Kings Lynn South, and I'm also the Borough Councillor for Kings Lynn South and West.
So in what ways do you think people in our area need support with poverty and homelessness?
Well, I think people need a great deal of support, particularly in the towns. And I think the role of the Borough Council is very important in this. And it has a duty to help people with homelessness, to try and prevent homelessness. And it's been setting up pods, which are small units where people can go to, because in past years there've been people sleeping rough on the street, which has been really awful. I mean, I found a young care leaver who was actually sleeping in the doorway of a shop, just sitting there. So I got his permission and contacted social services, and they offered him some help. But this is a huge problem with the pandemic. We have to make sure that nobody's sleeping rough, either now or really afterwards at all. So that's one of the first things about homelessness and prevention. We have to make sure there's more affordable housing. So we need to build enough houses in the right places that are affordable and that meet housing need and have enough space in them, because one issue is houses are being built to the smallest rooms ever since the 1930s. So there's not enough storage space and not so much privacy or room for children to do their homework. So I put a motion to the council, to the Borough Council, saying that we should adopt minimum room size standards as policy. Unfortunately, this wasn't adopted, but I'm hopeful that it will be, because I think that's important. So there's also support in housing, because some people who are very vulnerable find it difficult to manage their tenancies. They find things get on top of them, and there can be all sorts of issues. And there were some cuts to the support, but there's been more support being given now, because people do need that, but there isn't yet quite enough. So these are quite important, sort of making sure there's no rough sleepers, that making sure there's enough affordable housing and support for people, and making sure there's enough advice so that people know what benefits they're entitled to. There is help at the moment, of course. Most of it is online or over the telephone, but I think that there's more of a need for face-to-face advice generally, and more telephone support for people to fill in forms, because I found that when people are on the waiting list for social housing, they have to fill in forms often on their mobile phone, and that just doesn't work, and I've seen people struggling to do that. So I've been proposing to the Borough Council that that apprentices should be taken on, extra staff, and trained up specially to help people fill in forms over the telephone. And so I think there's a great deal. So I hope that's started to answer your question.
Thank you. And our next question is, in what ways can you as a councillor help the people in need of that support?
Well, firstly, I can signpost them to the right helplines. For example, there's the Norfolk Assistance Scheme, which people can contact. And I think it's 0344 800 8020. And if, for example, people are running short of food in the pandemic, or they need help with school uniforms or items for babies, or for disability, they can phone that number in the first instance. There's also help available from the Borough Council, which is Kings Lynn 616 200. For example, there is the Lily support, which helps people be put in touch with local groups in their area. There is support regarding mental health. There's a new helpline for that's been set up, because there's so many ways in which people do need help. For example, during the mental health helpline is 0808 196 3494, and that was set up last April because there'd been an issue with 300 young people had been deregistered by the Mental Health Trust from the waiting list because of COVID. And I'm on the health committee, and we said that's completely wrong, because people need more support because of COVID. And I'd had difficulty getting help for a young care leaver in the division who needed some help with mental health, and I kept contacting the mental health administrators, and there was no reply. And then they set up this helpline, which I believe is 24/7, and so we welcome feedback on how that works.
In your personal opinion, do you think poverty and homelessness has been an issue for a long time, or is it only in recent times?
Well, I think poverty and homelessness has always been there. You know, it's always been an issue, you know, for hundreds of years. And I think that with the advent of the welfare state after the Second World War, it became the responsibility of the state more to do a great deal. But obviously, as time has gone on, there have been times when funding has been put in and then it's been taken away. And I think recently, in the last decade, money was taken away, and it was thought that because there'd been support before, that somehow we didn't need it anymore and that the problem was solved. But that's not the case, because there always needs to be a safety net for people. And I think that the pandemic has shown that so many people, through no fault of their own, have been put in very difficult circumstances. And I think that people have realised that, you know, benefits are not enough to live on. I think a lot of people thought, well, maybe, you know, benefits, you know, you can live the life of right, but you can't. I mean, sort of £80 a week, you haven't got enough for your food and your bills, and it's very difficult. And so I think that there needs to be a strong consensus of support that we need to have, you know, a good welfare state. We need to have a decent standard of living and good housing for people, and good advice services. And I think we always need to look at what the local need is, because it's not, I mean, a lot of people have complex needs. A lot of these things are to do with health problems. They can be mental health, physical health, hidden disabilities. And I think that the reality is that we will always need to have these services there, and there will always be, sadly, there will be homelessness and poverty if we don't make sure that we've got mechanisms in place and proper funding to address it going forward. So I do believe that it's sadly probably always going to be with us, but we mustn't stop trying to solve it. We've got a duty to keep trying to solve it, and I really think that's important. And obviously for young people, because under 24 people don't get the same amount of benefits, but you know, they still have to pay rent. And when these changes were introduced, I was fortunate enough to be helping somebody in the House of Lords who was a person who came from Norwich called Baroness Hollis, who was speaking in the House of Lords to try and get welfare reform right. And she spoke against some of the measures, the bedroom tax, where you get money cut if you happen to have too many bedrooms, you get less housing benefit, and against those cuts where people under 24 were only going to have enough money to rent or have housing benefit cover a shared room in a house instead of a little flat of their own. And I think that's quite wrong. I think that there needs to be a bigger role of dignity for young people, to make sure that people, and particularly more vulnerable people like care leavers, aren't left in the lurch. So I do think there's a particular need for more help for young people, for mental health support as well, and also for help with training. Particularly in the pandemic, I think there are 100,000 fewer apprenticeships nationally than there used to be. So we've got to do all we can. And I've been doing some work with Children's Services, chairing as a subgroup to help care leavers into employment, education and training. But that, the whole thing applies for all young people. So there's always a lot to do.